This is my 7th video in my Color and Light series, and it's about light intensity. And check out my book, Ellen's Guide to Color, Light, and Shading on Amazon. When studying light intensity, I'm going to look at 3 factors: the light direction, the surface, and our line of sight. And so with 3 variables, we have 3 relationships to look at. This shows the relationship between the light direction and the surface. So here we have our light source and a sphere. And a light perpendicular to the surface will be the most intense. A ray at an acute angle of less than 90 degrees will be less intense because much of it is deflected away. The other important ray is the tangent light ray that touches the sphere at one point so that anything behind it is in the shade. How much does light intensity decline? Let's call this perpendicular ray 100% intense. Then the ray 60 degrees with the surface is 94%. Not very much of a difference. But when we decrease to 30 degrees and 20 degrees, the intensity goes from 73 to 45%. So it decreases at an increasing rate. I think intuitively we know that this makes sense. When sunlight is perpendicular to the surface, the light is the most intense. But at sunset, when it makes an angle of less than 90 degrees with the surface, it loses intensity. This principle is important in landscapes. At noon, the horizontal planes, like fields, get the most light. The diagonal planes, like mountains, receive less light. And finally, the vertical planes, like trees, receive the least amount of light. But it's hard to show this with landscapes since there are other competing factors like atmospheric perspective and the actual value of things like trees being dark. So instead I used a box, and this side is perpendicular to the light, so it's the lightest. This forms a 45 degree angle with the light, so it's darker, and the vertical surface here is the darkest. Now let's look at the surface relative to our line of sight. Here's the eye and our line of sight, and we're looking at a cylinder composed of squares that foreshorten toward the edges. And the light is up here, lighting up planes 1 and 2. We see plane 3 as the least foreshortened, so whatever value it has affects our overall view of the cylinder. Plane 1 is very light, but it's quite foreshortened, so it has less of an effect on the overall lightness of the cylinder. And the third relationship we'll look at is the line of sight versus the light direction. Here the light is behind us, so our line of sight runs in the same direction as the light. When the light hits the surface, it bounces to our eye, so we get a lot of reflected light. If this were a red surface, at a certain point it wouldn't be able to absorb all the non-red rays. So we would see red rays and some white rays that would whiten the red color to more of a pink, so it loses some of its saturation. And at the same time, this intense light would obscure details and textures. So all of these things should vary together. This pillow is front lit with the sun behind us. It doesn't show form well because we don't see halftones, we don't see the shadows. It has a narrow value range and it's high key, meaning very light. And texture is not very evident. Here, our line of sight is still perpendicular to the surface, but this time the light hits the surface at less than 90 degrees. So there's one spot where the light hits the surface and then goes directly to our eye. And that spot is the highlight, the lightest area, and the surface gets darker as it moves away from the highlight. This pillow is side lit from the right. So it has a light and a shaded side. It has a shadow and halftones, so we get a good idea about the form. We see texture easily, and there's a wide value range. To show intense light, I took this lighthouse and I removed the edges of the light area, and you get this image here. And you can see that the light seems so much more intense here than it does over here. And this actually happens. Look at these window panes. They're gone. You can't see them because the light is so intense. With strong light, we can see spheres as 3D forms. We can identify their light area, the shade, the reflected light, and the shadow. So we get a good idea that this is round and 3D. It has strong value contrasts. We see saturated colors here and unsaturated colors here. Now with weak light, we don't see any of that. If there is a shadow, it's indistinct with soft edges. So these balls look flat compared to this ball. For a landscape in strong light, we see distance easily. We see details, textures, a full range of values. And with the weak light, we barely see the end of this path. The space is contracted, details and textures are unclear, the value range is reduced, and the mood is mysterious, maybe scary. This table summarizes the video, and I'll let you read it on your own. Strong light intensity would be a sunny day or a spotlight. Weak light intensity would be an overcast day, firelight, moonlight, twilight. And there are certain phenomena that you can't get unless you have strong direct light, and that's sunbeams, rainbows, highlights, translucency, and dappled light. And I'll have videos for all of these. My next video is about highlights, and please remember to subscribe.